the first thing I wanted to do was just pay homage to the previous two conferences. As Dave said, John and I attended the first incarnation of this conference in 2010. We did present on the New Zealand approach, but the big take-home messages for me, particularly from that conference, listening to others from around the world, were a big emphasis on the carry-out strategy, particularly in North America. Having said that, the folks on the Appalachian Trail were making mouldering and conventional composting toilets work for them, with a hang of a lot of effort, but they were making them work. And then probably the biggest one for me was coming across Karen and the outfit she works for, Bees Backcountry Energy and Environmental Solutions. And Karen's going to talk to us later about the work they've been doing in Canada. John and Dave attended the Sustainable Summits Conference in 2014, and the big message coming home with those guys was this new generation of composting systems, and that's the vermicomposting concept that Roger started talking about this morning. I'm going to talk about a little bit more a bit later on, and then we'll get a video from Jeff Hill of Toilet Tech Solutions later on. And if there's one thing Jeff's going to talk about, I'm pretty sure it'll be about vermicomposting. Quick bit of context for you. Lou touched on a bunch of this stuff yesterday, but just in the intervening period from 2010 to now, a couple of major points to note there. We've had approximately 18% increase in population in New Zealand and a whacking big increase in international visitors, around about 65%. Some trends in there between 2010 2014, big dip in international travellers, largely due to the global financial crisis and the Christchurch earthquakes. But then since about 2014, we've had a very rapid increase in overseas visitors. We've seen a large increase in use on the Great Walks. Lou talked about that yesterday, and that's largely on the back of a marketing campaign with Air New Zealand. We've seen the influence of social media, say Instagram, for example, which is all about pretty pictures, and we're starting to see an influence there on where people want to go. And then just a wee side note here, which is quite exciting, is the emergence of stronger partnerships with the outdoors community in maintaining backcountry facilities. For example, federated mountain clubs, affiliated groups, and that's been achieved through the Community Conservation Partnerships Fund and the Outdoor Recreation Consortium. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time now talking about the predominant practices in the mountains in New Zealand. And when I say we, I'm generally using the royal we to refer to DOC, but we work quite closely with the Alpine Club, and the way they manage their facilities is not so dissimilar to the way we manage ours. In the high alpine, so say this park, Westland Taipotini National Park, and Mount Aspiring, some other locations around about the place. Our predominant approach is containing all human waste and flying it out for treatment at a municipal treatment plant. Mostly using 450 litre drums. You can see the one under the toilet there at Empress, and again down this middle slide here. In some locations we can discharge urine that's been uncontaminated by faecal waste to ground, but in other locations we have to fly the whole lot out. And in some instances, most particularly here at Mount Cook, there's been considerable investment in infrastructure to support the receiving and management of that waste once it comes out to town. The carry-out concept has got a little bit of traction here, but still pretty limited in use. The New Zealand Alpine Club hut at Whakapapa ski area, they've got a variant of this where they do contain all their waste at the hut there, and then they pump it into containers which are then carried out down the mountain by a snow groomer. There are a couple of clubs using the mountain for snowcraft courses, and they are using blue barrels to deal with their waste. And then Shirley here and her team instigated a trial in the late 2000s using the poo pots. And my understanding is there were initially quite good uptake of use, and then it's sort of plateaued out a bit since then. Moving further down the mountain into slightly less extreme conditions, we're still using pit toilets at low use sites above the bushline. Carroll Hut's one example, Cess Clark Hut, another one I can think of. We're still using the fly-out concept quite a lot, and in this particular environment, more pump out to flight tanks and then flying those out to the road end for disposal at a wastewater treatment plant. And then when we get into higher use sites, and that's what these slides are here, you start to see more standard type systems that you might find in an urban or peri-urban situation, so septic tanks to a land application system, so no flush or low flush into a septic tank and then discharge to land. They're dominated by primary treatment, so for example Welcome Flat Hut and huts on the St James Walkway, but in a few limited sites where we've got very difficult soils or water bodies adjacent, like Mackay Hut on the Heafy Track, Angelus Hut at Nelson Lakes, we're treating effluent to a high level, so secondary treatment level, before discharging to ground. I was just thinking before, actually, just to give you an idea of some of the volumes we're dealing with, if you can think about a place like Luxmore Hut or Lake Mackenzie Hut, where we might have in the region of 10,000 bed nights a year, if we're allowing 25 to 30 litres per person per stay of wastewater generated, then over the course of the season you might be looking at 250,000 to 300,000 litres worth of wastewater that you've got to deal with on site. So it's not insignificant. One of the other things that's been going on, which is kind of cool to a certain extent, we've been able to get departmental best practice recognised by regulatory bodies as a means of compliance with statutory requirements. And this one on the right here is an example of that. Part of the hut procurement manual, Part F, toilets and grey water, that is recognised as a means of compliance with the building code. I will note though that it's pretty limited in scope, and it only covers pit toilets and relatively simple grey water systems. Any other system type, when we're applying for building consent, we need to propose those as an alternative solution to the building code, and they therefore may go under a higher level of scrutiny by the consenting authority. Taking all that on board, just wanted to run through some of the issues that we're faced with. From an operational perspective, and I think Colin touched on this and Mike touched on this morning too, if our predominant system is a fly-out vault or a pump-out vault, it is extremely costly to operate. They're great insofar as that they minimise the risks to the environment around the areas where people congregate, huts, campsites and the like, but they don't come cheap to operate, and that's mostly around the cost of helicopter hire, but also associated aircraft noise and emissions. A couple other sort of or less big picture type issues there. They can be a bit fiddly to operate with things icing up, and they do require a certain level of interaction with the user group, and if there's a lack of communication there, or we aren't able to respond fast enough, then can result in some pretty nasty overflows. From a strategic point of view, we're very much at the moment sticking to what we know, a low risk, keep it simple approach. We have no one person, the way the department's set up at the moment, coordinating our response to this issue. So looking at strategic issues, documenting current best practice, and very much little or no research and development into new systems or improvements to existing systems. So what will typically happen is that there'll be operational staff, the likes of Anita down there in Wanaka, others in the audience here, they'll come up with a problem, and they'll look for help with sorting that problem out, and they'll come to the team that I work for and Will here, and we'll work with them to come up with a solution for that particular site. And then we'll assist them by getting that solution implemented. But there's no one driving things at the top level. From a social point of view, we talked about the poo pots before, and we had a couple of really good presentations about those this morning. Shirley and her team here did instigate that trial back in the early 2000s, and some level of uptake there, but not as widely available as maybe people would like them to be. And there was some issues with the cornstarch bag product that's being used. If we're not providing the appropriate receptacle for these things, then they're getting dumped into vault toilets, which are blocking up pumps and so on and so forth. So pretty cool to see Aoraki Solutions launching their product range from Restop and others that are wider range of products, will work better and make it easier for people to deal with them. So the last slide from me, despite the lack of R&D, what this forum has allowed us or presented to us is some transfer of knowledge from other countries and other organisations, and this is this idea of the new wave of composting toilets, so this vermicomposting concept. So this one here, we've taken this idea, it's a proprietary system from France. There's a couple of companies marketing them, EcoSphere and EcoDomio, and Jeff Hill of Toilet Tech Solutions in Canada is marketing them over there as well. So the basic concept is there's a conveyor belt type system. You do your business, the liquids flow forward and out to a drainage field. There's a wee pedal beside the toilet, bit like you'd have on a boat with a pump system, and that shifts the waste out from underneath the toilet pedestal out into a room in the back of the building there, out here. And the whole idea is that it gets spread out, so more surface area, more oxygen. You get leaf litter added from the local forest, and it's drier, better aerated, and a much higher chance of success. Just trying to compost it like you would have been at home. They can result in, can have very good results in not having to be emptied at all at some sites in Europe. And others, if you are having to empty them once you get them to the right point, Roger showed us earlier today, you can just dispose of them. It is safe to dispose of solid waste into the surrounding environment. They are very expensive to establish, as we found with this one at Lake Daniels. That was in excess of $100,000 for a two-pan toilet. But if we've got a very low capital cost, operational cost, and not having to fly anything out from site, then I think that's a pretty big win. So potentially positive solution for moderate to high use sites with a reasonably regular staff presence. They can operate quite successfully with the microorganisms from the surrounding forest, but they do work better with a composting worm, so a litter worm as opposed to an earthworm. Now, I didn't know this until the other day, but apparently we're quite light on those in New Zealand. So we've got a couple of choices here. One is to put up with the slower composting rates that you get out of the local leaf litter, or we can start considering introducing an exotic species to these sites. And so there's a few issues there, one with the biosecurity side of things, and two, the legal side of things that we've got to work through yet before we can consider implementing this a little bit more widely.
Drivers of change in waste management of human waste. So I'm going to talk a little about that, provide a perspective, and some of the implications. Firstly, cultural drivers. I think Māori culture has been a major driver of change in New Zealand for a number of decades. It's influenced how we treat wastewater nationally. That influence continues to drive change, and that evolves out of the Māori culture abhorrence of discharge of wastewater, treated or not, to water, and preference for disposal to land, which has challenges for larger communities. So that has driven change throughout New Zealand, including where once we used to long drops in high huts into glaciers. That's where surface water, in a sense, although it's frozen. In areas of special cultural significance, there is a ban on all human waste discharge, and a couple of examples of that are here in Mount Cook, Plateau Hut, where everything's flown out, and similarly with the Empress. And further north in the Lake Waikaremoana Great Walk, all the waste there, all the human waste, is pumped out to a barge, then barged to a treatment plant, and all waste, liquid and solid, from the treatment plant gets exported out of the catchment. Yesterday, Lou Sanson in his address talked about the continuing influence of the Māori culture, and an example of that was the new land entity, the finishing of the Te Orowera National Park and the new land entity called Orowera, and I think that's hugely significant, and I think that significance of culture will continue to be a powerful driver of what we choose to do in the mountains. Public health is a standard driver. Human waste, particularly faeces, is a cause of disease. Social drivers, now that's been a powerful driver for various perspectives. We used to use pit toilets widely. Then as numbers got bigger in certain locations, Great Walks particularly, the idea of pit toilets, they get not so good when they're overloaded, but it was the user preference or the user experience that drove septic tanks, I think. There was certainly influence. And septic tank management, a litre of human waste generates about 30 litres of wastewater. So it magnifies very, very much what we have to deal with. And there is a growing trend away from septic tank systems to vault systems, where once they were seen as smelly holes that people would avoid and go somewhere else. Modern design does work well, and that's been following the US Forestry Service design, which proves very effective. So there's also the backcountry versus the front country. For backcountry, low use, pit toilets are still predominant. The front country, high users, pit toilets don't work. Septic tanks get complicated, managing wastewater treatment systems. And then talking to, Anita Middlemas, who's here, recently about their experience at Wanaka and the changing user patterns, where once many travellers would go on buses, the bulk travelling if you like, and they would stop at certain points. That user pattern's changing to individual travellers if you like, freedom travellers, and they'll stop where they choose, and that's quite rapidly emerging to be problems at walkheads and where there's no toilets, waste proliferates, human waste. And the environment, that's what we're here to protect. The alpine environment is exceptionally sensitive to influences, whether it's pounding feet on tracks, whether it's the noise that annihilates the tranquility. And human waste too has potential of greatly damaging our natural environment through what we call, as engineers, nutrients. That's what farmers call as fertiliser, and urine is jolly good at that. So our lakes are very low in nutrients. It doesn't take much in the way of nutrients to transform them from that pristine character, or the flora. So those are conventional, the three drivers of change: cultural, social, and environmental. But things are changing. We talked about the user numbers and patterns changing dramatically and rapidly. Emerging contaminants, and that's something I think experienced in Great Walk huts. More and more people from the towns like that experience. They come with their town habits or their medicines, personal care products. They are loaded with certain chemicals that can have lasting effects in the environment. There's little known about them. There's enough research being done to say they do damage our flora and fauna, particularly soil structures and the living organisms there. National parks is a place we want to keep pristine. This is an introduction of a long-term potential modification. Another major is new regulations. The New Zealand Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, which came into being just a year or two ago, is driving a new way of change in how regional government manages fresh waters throughout the country. Traditional management has been with descriptive quality controls, like the amount of algae or macro sedimentation or whatever in the water. Now they're changing to numerical controls, that is numbers. They'll be easier to regulate, and each regional government's going to set standards for receiving waters throughout the country. And in the headwaters, alpine areas, they're likely to be very high standards, and that's going to flow on through new sets of rules. And the risk is well, the big players in the game, the fed farmers for agriculture, local government for communities, will be right in there how to influence that, to ensure that they can operate effectively with wastewater treatment plants affordably. The advocate for the backcountry is primarily the Department of Conservation. The changes that could evolve could seriously compromise backcountry waste management in the sense of rules making what could be practical solutions impractical to comply with the rules. And I think a recent example of that is not to do with this New Zealand this new policy statement, but the Canterbury Conservancy, where there's a new rule change came out last year, and this area here is in the Canterbury Conservancy, proposing new changes for on-site wastewater systems or backcountry systems and rural systems. And the department took the initiative of submitting and proposing a special rule for backcountry huts. And the commissioners adopted it and recommended that be adopted. So that was a great initiative. They stepped in. They've got something that's workable for the backcountry, and I think that initiative will need to continue as this new wave of regulation follows. Treating wastewater is understanding what's in it, and traditional treatment was the carbonaceous material, that's the carbohydrates and sugars and so forth. That's readily assimilated in the environment, readily so, and it changes to carbon dioxide and water, so it vanishes in effect. Pathogens are a big one. The right, certainly below the snow line and the right soils, they can be eliminated effectively, as Tom pointed out with compost systems. The big challenge will be with this nutrients. They're not easy to remove. Those are particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen moves through the environment very easily. The only way to remove it is to either have plants take it up, and that modifies the plant environment, or transforming it to nitrogen or atmospheric nitrogen. And that's a complex process, and it needs really controlled conditions to work. So removal of nitrogen is going to be a major, evolving throughout the country, and need to be careful. That's not easy to remove in the backcountry, and certainly in cold climates, it's not easily removed. So a couple of briefly case studies. One is the Matukituk Valley, iconic valley, alpine valley leading to Mount Aspiring, one of the Matterhorn of the South as it's known. There's a road end there, and was it 14 years ago, the number of cars ending at the road end was chocking it up, so the department built a car park, you can see on the right-hand side, and a few years later the number of cars had increased, so they extended that car park, doubled its capacity. In the middle of it there, they also took the initiative to put in a toilet somewhere in here with a small field. Was it 2008, there were about 10,000 cars a year. 4 years later, or 5 years later, it had gone up nearly 50%. So the growth was rapid. A couple of years ago, they started monitoring users of the toilets and monitoring the water use. And the original design of the toilet was for something less than 2,000 litres a day. It's estimated to be up to 9,000 litres a day now and rising rapidly. So once where they had a small system, it worked very well. The logistics now treating for that kind of flow means the area needed would be something in order of 6,000 square metres. That's more than the car park. And the small bit of land they bought, part of it's used for the car park. The rest of it here is a floodway, if you like, for Raspberry Creek. So it's all of a sudden transformed what was an easily manageable situation with a septic tank to a real challenge. They've got a small site, growing numbers, not enough land to treat it. And the biggest challenge of all are the regulators and what they will require to be done. And the concern is removal of nutrients, particularly nitrogen. That potentially okay in summer when it's warm and workable, but the change in user patterns is that more and more people are coming in the colder months and through into winter. And in those cold climate situations, it's not possible to remove nitrogen without very sophisticated gear. So all of a sudden you've got the situation, do you develop quite a complex wastewater treatment plant in a backcountry location? The other alternative is you've got to take it all away. Second case study that's come up, this area is following on from Simon's talk yesterday about our changing environment, the mountains falling down, and his comment about structures in the mountains need to be temporary. They need to be made so that they can be there for a while but removed when needed, whether it's collapsing rock structure, risk from avalanche or whatever it may be. The Alpine Club has taken on a project to trial a fly-in structure in the mid-Tasman, and the proposed site is where there used to be near where there was Beetham Hut, a very popular hut until it got skittled by an avalanche. And it's being funded by the Community Conservation Partnership Fund that was initiated by the Department of Conservation. Again, Lou Sanson talked about that yesterday. So that's a great opportunity to trial something new. The engineers have been working on it for a couple of years. Designing a fly-in hut has been a big challenge. The big challenge in New Zealand is high winds, and we'll hear more about that later today. The other side of it is where you put a hut, it will attract people, and even though it's only a small hut, it's been designed to fly in, 4 to 6 bunk. There's likely to be campers around it, and it'll be a popular place if it's anything like the Beetham Hut was. So how will waste be managed? The dominant or sole method currently in Mount Cook's the fly-out toilet system. It generates noise, it's the carbon generator. It doesn't cope well in winter because these drums get frozen up and you can't remove them. So there's a few options. Carry out to a dump station. Locate something that can be easily flown out. It doesn't the huge cost of a fly-out toilet. Have a local dump station, sort of halfway between, carry out the whole lot. Vermicompost that Tom's talked about and Roger talked about earlier. Incineration is not unknown. There's a club hut on Ruapehu that's using this. How effectively, I don't know, but jolly expensive, I expect. And then there's solar drying and evaporation. Each of these has its challenges. I think each of them needs to be worked through. I think each site needs to be looked at individually to understand it, and then working through the options, rationalise what will be an effective solution. So that's ahead of us with the Alpine Club and the Department of Conservation of how we resolve a solution for this new hut here. I'll wrap up there. Thank you.